Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. This is Counting the Cost in Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, as Facebook makes stock market history, we'll look at how the concentration of huge profits in a handful of companies is impacting everyone else. Also this week, Africa's blue economy, concerns about the lack of data and marine protections as offshore diamond mining becomes a reality. Plus, cementing the BRICS. Major emerging economies push for closer ties to offset Trump's protectionism. Google's parent company Alphabet, Facebook and Amazon all stepped up with quarterly earnings this week, and there were some very interesting takeaways. It's less than a week since the EU hit Alphabet with a $5.1 billion fine over the way it limits competition through its Android mobile software. That's a very big fine, but the company's profits are even bigger. Facebook, though, shocked investors, forecasting slowing revenues. As a result, it saw about $119 billion wiped off its stock market value, the largest one-day loss for any company in US stock market history. Kristen Salumi reports from New York.
For Facebook, which has experienced exponential growth since its initial public offering in 2012, it was an uncharacteristic plunge in market value after an uncharacteristically bad quarterly report. On Thursday, share prices tumbled. Sure, profits were up 31% over last year, but for the first time since 2015, they fell short of expectations.
To some extent, this correction was expected. I think the smart money had expected this. And when you're priced for perfection, there's no margin of error.
A series of scandals seem to be catching up to the social media company. Founder Mark Zuckerberg was called to account by Congress over Russia's use of the platform to try to influence the 2016 election.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
And the harvesting of user data through the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica. The company says increases in security spending are likely to continue eating into profits. And tougher user protection laws in Europe have already cost the company some 3 million users.
There's some structural issues right now, and they need to really work that out. It's going to take some time, but at the end of the day, at the very end of the day, Facebook is a good company.
Facebook remains one of the most valuable publicly traded companies heading into the 2018 midterm elections when its new security protocols will be put to the test. Mark Zuckerberg is attempting to reassure investors, saying that this time he's confident the social media company will get it right.
E-commerce giant Amazon also came out with numbers this week, and it topped $2 billion in quarterly profit for the first time in its history. Part of the reason these companies are so profitable is because the world's digital population keeps growing. Anyone born after 1985 is a digital native and can't imagine a time before the internet. As of July this year, 4.1 billion people were active internet users and 3.3 billion were social media users. Because the internet has now gone mobile, more people in 2018 have access to the internet than safe drinking water. The size of the internet is in fact becoming hard to digest. So just consider this. Every minute, 38 million messages are passed between various individuals on WhatsApp. There are 3.7 million search queries on Google. And every minute, $862,823 are spent online. According to the World Bank, developed economies still dominate the spread of knowledge and information. The worry is that the world is not reaping the so-called digital dividends of this transformation. Well, joining us now from Brussels is Alasdair Reid, Principal Researcher and Policy Director at the European Future Innovation Systems Centre. Good to have you with us. So the gatekeepers of internet, like Google, Amazon, Facebook, they're few, they're huge. Are they operating fairly, though?
Here within the European Union, the Competition Commissioner has been acting very much on that sort of philosophy that those companies, given their power in the digital sector, which in the past monopolies were at national level, Nowadays, monopolies can develop at global level with very negative effects. And so I think the European Commission's position here has been very much that these companies have a special responsibility to act fairly and not infringe competition. I think that explains a number of the interventions that have been taken by the European Commission.
Is 2018 turning out to be a decisive year for Facebook?
Well, I mean, in terms of Facebook, I think it's been particularly hard hit by some of the concerns that have arisen over the different scandals that have taken place in terms of the access to data and the use of that data, particularly related to elections. And I think that's had an effect. I think also that's a sort of natural trend in any market. People, particularly, I would say the younger generations, are looking for other tools and moving to other areas, other apps and platforms. So there is a sort of a natural trend, I think, linked to the sort of hit that they've taken from the sort of privacy abuses that took place related to Brexit and other referendums and elections more in the last year or so. I think this has had certainly a negative effect. Is it the peak of Facebook? Well, I'm not sure if that's yet the case. I think they have a very strong position. But I think it's a very good example of where there's a need for clear regulation and checks on the use of the data that's collected by such a company.
Okay, but when you say clear regulation, who should regulate them? Should government step in and put more regulations?
Well, I think there's a sort of, first there's a sort of self-regulation, which I think, all the companies will claim that they are taking appropriate steps to protect the privacy of citizens and commercial data that they may be holding. And I think that's part of any sort of corporate responsibility. And
but that doesn't seem to have worked, given some of the recent scandals that we've seen in some of the online, tech giants, right?
Well, I think that's a first. I think that's a minimum that we as citizens or other companies in the economy can expect from these large companies. The second step, I think, is regulation. I think, as I say, the European Commission here in Europe has taken rather strong action on a number of fronts, both in terms of dominant position, but also in terms of introducing the data protection regulation recently, which is intended to limit that. Now, of course, for instance, we try to make sure we're using servers that are based in Europe because we know that if the servers are outside of Europe, then the data protection regulation of the European Union may not have the full force that we would want it to have. So I think, again, it's up to each of us to be aware of how regulation can improve the situation or limit those potential abuses, but also how we as citizens or companies need to be aware of the potential risks when we're using these services.
Let me jump in and ask this question, Alasdair, though. How would you regulate more what is a very untraditional product? I mean, price controls don't work when the product is free. These companies, as you said at the beginning, have to be big, so breakups won't necessarily make the service any better. It's a bit tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, breakup is. I mean, there is talk, and certainly in certain areas, that there may be need at some point for the same sort of reflections that happened perhaps in the 70s or 80s around the telecom companies that maybe have to be applied to the sort of digital platforms as well. I'm not sure that's something that's going to happen in the short term, or that it's even necessarily the solution. I think one of the things, and I think that's where, if we look again at the European situation, people often say we don't have a lot of tech giants here. Well, yes and no. We have a number of very agile, smaller mini giants, if you like, or medium giants, which are coming up in very specialized areas. And I think those trying to stimulate the growth of those sorts of companies as competitors and allowing them to have that level playing field may be as effective as any sort of move to break up the very large tech giants. So I think trying to stimulate the sort of new emerging solutions that can become themselves sort of mini platforms and over time compete with some of the existing tech giants.
Well, as you plot the future, how do you think the founders of the internet would view what it's become today?
Well, I know that I think some of them would be. I think it's again, it's not black and white. I think there's a lot of very positive things have happened, and I gave a presentation about 2 or 3 years ago, going back to the late 80s, and I had in front of me a team of my staff, all ages, and some of them weren't born when I was starting from about 1990 onwards. And some of the changes that have happened are very, extraordinary when you do that backtracking. You say, well, we didn't have a mobile phone, we didn't have smart Wi-Fi, we didn't have, and so on at the end of the 2000s. So these are incredible changes. As I said, they are having huge changes to mobility, the way we move around, health sector and so on. So it's huge benefits for us. I think the internet and the Internet of Things, the future applications of artificial intelligence, these are all things that should be enablers for a better society and not only about making profits. I think that's where we have to get that balance right in the future.
Thanks so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Still to come on Counting the Cost, the commercial hunting of fin whales is under the spotlight in Iceland after the death of a rare mixed breed. The Chinese president says there'll be no winners in a global trade war. He's urging unity among BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Hara Mutata has more from the annual BRICS summit in Johannesburg.
Leaders from 5 of the world's leading emerging markets say they are united when it comes to trade. They say protectionism, which is being pushed by US President Donald Trump, should be rejected.
What is constant is the flare-up of geopolitical conflicts and the escalation of protectionism and unilateralism. They directly affect emerging markets and developing countries. We must work together with the United Nations, the G20 and the World Trade Organization to safeguard the rules-based multilateral trading system, liberalise and facilitate trade and investment, and reject protectionism outright.
It's the first time presidents from the BRICS trade bloc are meeting since Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on all Chinese imports. Economists say the trade war could also hurt smaller countries. Some fear Trump's plans will stifle global economic growth. Leaders at the BRICS summit say increasing global trade encourages economies of all countries to grow. But emerging economies could be damaged if the US imposes tariffs on certain goods. Trump's threats to impose tariffs have given Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa more reason to increase trade cooperation between them. It's also forced China, the world's second largest economy after the United States, to look for other markets to buy and sell its products.
China has been the most important trading partner with the U.S., so is U.S. to China. But now, with this escalating trade tension, we can almost be certain that in the next few years, the trade between those two countries will be hurt a lot, along with a very volatile exchange market. So, for China to extend or to strengthen other relations, Europe and Africa would be its top choices because of the sheer size of those markets.
BRICS leaders in South Africa have suggested another meeting be held where world players discuss their differences and perhaps prevent a global trade war. For that to happen, all parties have to agree to come to the table and try to find a balance between promoting national interests and those of the global community.
Al Jazeera went to visit a technology hub in Sao Paulo to talk to experts who believe BRICS can provide an alternative way forward for emerging economies. Daniel Schweimler reports.
Brazil believes it has the solutions to many of the problems shared by its fellow BRICS members, such as in medicine and aviation. All major developing economies, home to 40% of the world's population, with a vision that most would agree is straining to fulfill its potential.
The world is becoming less Western, less concentrated, less homogeneous. And it would be better even for the world to leave space for BRICS countries to make this difference and even have more power and control this transition to a world that is less westernized.
All 5 BRICS members are looking to their strengths to see what they can best contribute to the growth of their alliance. Brazil has this technology hub outside Sao Paulo.
It's very clear that we have many benefits in exploring more deeply this collaboration.
An example is this surveillance balloon, operated by one person, for monitoring large spaces, big events, and to our surprise, even our own interview with one of the project developers.
It is a Brazilian product, and I know, like said, the Olympic Games. We have other Olympic Games, we have World Cups, and a lot of events, persistent monitoring to do the surveillance of the event.
With a bullet-absorbent skin, it's also ideal for monitoring illegal deforestation and poaching. While we were here, it spotted a nearby fire. Its manufacturers believe it can thrive in South Africa, India or Russia.
Brazil's technological future is here, developing the technological innovations that they believe will be of interest and will sell to their partners in BRICS and beyond.
All 5 BRICS members have their problems. Brazil struggling to emerge from recession, China in a trade war with the US, all searching for shared solutions.
When we start working together, I think we can all grow together. And the thing that I see Brazil offering for this is the talent and the flexibility and the open mind that Brazil has.
Now perhaps at the 10th BRICS summit, all members will play to their strengths and embrace common interests.
Africa's blue world is our focus next. It's a world made up of vast lakes, oceans and rivers. The African Union calls the blue economy the new frontier of African Renaissance. There's been a lot of talk and forums focusing on it over the past year. All of the branding around the blue economy states Africa is suffering from sea blindness or not sufficiently developing its extensive marine resources. Lying on the ocean bed are potential sources of metals and oil and gas. Seabed mining, however, would destroy critical, delicate and little understood sea life. And it's those concerns about the lack of data which still persist as efforts get underway to exploit the ocean ecosystem. 38 of Africa's 54 states are coastal. Look at the island nation of Mauritius, for example. It's one of the smallest countries in the world, but it has territorial waters the size of South Africa. The blue economy is not confined to fishing and tourism. It also includes things like transportation, deep-sea coastal mining and energy. But there are environmental concerns. A new offshore deep-sea mining industry is already taking shape in Namibia, for example, vacuuming diamonds from the ocean floor. Proponents see a sparkling future in the ocean as onshore mineral deposits dry up. While the blue economy has the capacity to provide desperately needed jobs, the challenge is all about how to exploit water resources in a sustainable way. Environmentalists are warning more research is required to shape policies. Joining us now via Skype from the city of Mombasa in Kenya is David Obo. David is the Director of Coastal Oceans Research and Development in the Indian Ocean, Cordio, as it's known, East Africa. Good to have you with us. David, so a lot of focus right now on the so-called blue economy. Is it more than just a rebrand of marine exploitation?
Oh, yes, it is much more than that. So the blue economy is what we try and put in front of it as the word sustainable, because really the blue economy is about utilizing the ocean's resources, but sustainably without damaging them. And this is really the way of the future.
Deep sea mining of hydrocarbons, diamonds, for example, still problematic, right?
Yes, it's still problematic, but it's still quite a long time into the future, particularly in our region, the West Indian Ocean, for deep sea mining. I think the technologies and the incentives or the prices to really extract those minerals is quite far into the future. It's much closer with natural gas. In Mozambique, of course, there are huge finds of natural gas and several companies moving forward very quickly to exploit those. But that has transboundary implications for the countries around Mozambique and very strong implications within Mozambique for their living ecosystems and the natural resources. So there's a lot of talk about it. We're pushing hard. I think it's going to take a step change or transformation in awareness around economic planning to really make a difference. But there's a lot of forces pushing in that direction.
Put it into perspective for us, David. To what extent does Africa's marine resources have the potential to completely transform life on the continent as we know it?
Well, it's a hard thing to predict. The African Union is pitching that very strongly, which I think is right. In 50-year planning out to 2063 is that development on the continent should come from the sea and can come from the sea. It can happen, but we do, as I said, it's a transformation. We need to really transform the way sectors plan amongst each other, countries amongst each other, and also appreciation by the economic and corporate powers that the value is generated from ecosystems or assets that can be damaged, and you need to manage them sustainably, just like you'd manage a hedge fund or some sort of capital asset that you have, so that you don't destroy it while you're exploiting it.
Where will the massive investment, though, come from? I mean, a lot of this needs a lot of money pouring into infrastructural projects in an environment where reform is really needed, political, regulatory, even legal, right?
Yes, that's right. There needs to be, I mean, the legal systems and the regulatory systems are not really up to scratch in most African countries, and we're building major infrastructure assets like railways and ports, power plants and things like that, without really appropriate strategic assessments of the environmental and other assets that are affected by those infrastructure projects. I think clearly the money is there to invest in these things, whether it comes from China or other sources as well. But to have that money invested in ways that don't damage major assets important to their projects as well as to other sectors, that really needs to change. It needs to change in the next 10 to 20 years. Otherwise, you know, a lot of damage will be done at that time.
And finally, what about on the educational level? Is enough being done to re-educate people and how to manage and even to regard one's marine resources?
So on the education front, enough isn't being done. No, I mean, the sea is still on the you know, behind a lot of other priorities in most Africans' minds and mentalities, from the countries down to individuals. And we need to transform that. I think awareness about climate change and the ocean connections is helping. Aware about plastics and oceans pollution is really leaping to the front in the last few years. So we're trying to ride this wave to get that awareness and then get the education systems also building that into the curriculum and really understanding how much we do depend on the sea.
All right. Good chatting to you. Thanks so much, David.
Okay. Yeah, pleasure.
And finally, Iceland's whaling industry is under the spotlight once again after a cross between the protected blue whale and a fin whale was killed and brought ashore for processing. Hybrid whale meat cannot be exported. Now there are increasing calls for the industry to be finally banned in the country. Nick Clark reports from Reykjavik.
Iceland has much to boast of when it comes to natural resources. Its dramatic scenery and geothermal springs draw tourists in their millions. And there's the marine environment too. Tens of thousands of people go whale watching every year. There's even a whale museum where you can immerse yourself in an ocean of life-size whale replicas. But one thing Iceland tries not to publicise too much is the fact that whales are still killed commercially here, which enrages a big sector of society.
Doing this, they are going steps backwards into the Viking times. And whaling nowadays, especially, well, not just in Iceland, but whaling in Iceland, show that people is not as developed as they really think to show the world that they are.
So it's something of a PR disaster when photographs like this appear. What is suggested to be a highly endangered and protected blue whale killed and brought back to shore for processing. DNA sampling has since shown the whale was in fact a rare hybrid between a fin whale, for which Icelandic whalers do have a quota, and the banned blue whale. Kristen Lofson, who runs the company that killed the whale, says his whalers acted in good faith.
The whalers working for us, they've been doing it for decades. And we see blue whales all the time here. And when we approach them, we see it as a blue whale, and then we leave it and look for fin whales. As simple as that. They went after this one, I think, for 1 hour, and there is no question in my mind that this was nothing else than a fin whale when it was taken, but turned out to be a hybrid.
These are images of a fin whale being legally processed at the whaling station. Most of the products are exported to Japan. The killing of the hybrid whale, which is banned from export, has led to more calls for the industry to be finally halted in Iceland.
This hunting is very inaccurate. They cannot know the difference between a hybrid blue fin whale and a fin whale. They cannot make a distinction. That's what they say between the two. So, you know, for that sake, they should absolutely stop it.
So this is where Kavala's 2 whaling ships come in from the ocean with their catch and take it up the fjord to the processing plant. They hunt for about 100 days a year between June and September, and this year they have a quota of 161 fin whales. It's an activity that has dwindling support amongst Icelanders, 10 years ago, about 70% of the population were in favour of whaling. Today that figure is more like 50-50. And as tourists seek out whales alive in the wild, still there's a pressing issue: what to do with several tons of hybrid whale cut up in a freezer with nowhere to go.
And that's our show for this week, but remember you can get in touch with us via Twitter, use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Sami Zaidan from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.